Thank you, Jill, and thanks everyone for attending today. This webinar is about making cybersecurity a part of your travel plans. It's late June as at the time we're recording this, and I bet a lot of you are getting ready to maybe go to the beach or hop on an airplane or something like that. And we live in a world now where separation from technology doesn't really exist. So we felt like it's a good time to revisit this so you can travel safely and protect your data. So let's get started. 1 second. There we go. Remember when you could go on vacation and be completely disconnected? That doesn't really exist anymore. I can't think of a time where I've really had extended time away from my phone. I remember when I was younger, I went on a trip to Mexico, and the internet was like something you checked in with once a week just to see what your emails were. We didn't have smartphones and things like that back then. But this isn't the reality of 2022. Even in foreign countries, your phone now probably works. I know early smartphones and stuff like that, you had to get the right international phones, but those barriers are falling. People are just more willing to engage when traveling. The expectations have changed. I know for myself personally that if I got a work call, maybe it was a serious security issue or a client had a major thing, even if I'm on vacation, generally I'm willing to take those calls. And I suspect I'm not the only person who's like that. And for better or worse, that's sort of something that's changed. A lot of hotels are sort of building amenities with the idea of having workers, people who are working remotely. And I think even with the drop, for some people, they operate a little more nomadic and they can work anywhere. The hotels, Airbnbs, and such recognize that. Public Wi-Fi is ubiquitous. If you go to any kind of restaurant or coffee shop or maybe a bookstore or maybe even just the lobby of an office building with a lot of different tenants in it, there's a pretty good chance you'll find some kind of public Wi-Fi accessible for any device to connect to the internet and continue working. One thing people don't really understand is that now, I think maybe 20, 30 years ago, if you lost your wallet, that would be a huge catastrophe and the biggest panic. I feel like now, if you lost your phone, if you dropped your iPhone in a sewer or something like that, you would feel that a lot more than your wallet. I mean, not only do you maybe lose a little cash in your wallet and maybe you have to get your ID reprinted or something like that, but if you lost your phone, you might be losing valuable data. It may be difficult for you to actually get home or get to your car or access your information. There may be security issues, so on and so forth. So the cell phone is now sort of the most valuable thing we hold on us. So we owe it to ourselves to take some basic care of our cyber risks. So for today's agenda, we're going to keep it pretty simple. Let's review the risks when we travel, sort of know what we're jumping into, what kind of sharks we're swimming with, what kind of data luggage we are carrying. We bring a lot of things with us, but what kind of data are we actually bringing with us, and how does that make us liable and put us at risk when we're traveling? Settings and configurations when traveling. So if you're on the road, you want to make sure that you can work appropriately or avoid incidents. What are some things you can do to secure yourself? We're going to talk about eavesdropping, theft, and other threats that aren't technical. Public Wi-Fi, devices and tech in the wild, stuff like that. And social media when traveling, and Q&A. So here's a few cyber risks when traveling. I mean, obviously the first thing that comes to mind, and this probably won't blow anyone's mind, is unsecured wireless networks and public devices, USB charging stations, and things like that. So anytime you are going out, an airport is a great example. There are a lot of these networks that you can just connect to and begin working. There's also these little charge ports. You can just take your USB cable from your phone, plug it right into the port, and you can go from there. But there's some risks to that. I mean, you don't know necessarily with these USB ports what they're connected to. There's things like the so-called pineapples, rogue access points that make you think you're connecting to a network, but really you're running your data through a third party and other stuff. And so these networks are really unknown to us. We connect to them and we do work on them, but we don't know who else is swimming on that network. There's of course device theft. If somebody has device on them And that device, there's obviously the cost of the device. An iPhone can be pretty expensive to replace, but there's also the data that's actually on it. What if it has your personal information, a tax return, banking information? Maybe it has access to a bank account or a credit card account, so that they could actually start swiping at registers or something like that. You really need to be mindful of those issues. There's phishing and social engineering. So when you're on the road, you're perhaps at more risk to deal with some of the personal threats, like email that encourages you to click somewhere and give you ransomware, or someone taking advantage of the fact that they know you're traveling to another country to try and manipulate you into doing something. So just keep that in mind as well. And then there's threats originating within countries themselves. So it's one thing if if you're dealing with threats that are within the United States. In this country, we certainly have our fair share of cybersecurity threats. But let's say, for the sake of argument, you went to Eastern European country, where things are a little bit more difficult right now. And there's going to be different hacking groups, different people on those networks, people with different motivations. And so if you're going to a country that perhaps has more cyber threats, and I believe the U.S. government posts warnings about that, that can be a potential issue. And then finally, there's regulation. So if you're traveling and you're carrying certain devices or data, you may have to put in special consideration. So let's say, for the sake of argument, you're in the healthcare space and you have access to patient records via a tablet that connects to your EMR or something like that. You can't just bring that with you and operate the same as if it was just a regular iPad that you would use to read a book or watch a movie or something like that. So how heavy is your data luggage? So before you pack up your devices, take inventory of what you're carrying. Do the devices carry work information, and what's the policy of traveling with work data? Do you really know what's sitting on your phone, your laptop, your tablet, whatever it is? And what is the policy about that? I mean, if you're bringing company data with you outside the office, is that even allowed? Are you supposed to be doing that? Are you in violation of company policy? And you may say, well, they'll never know about it, but that you might only find that out in the event of a breach, and that's not when you want to determine that sort of thing. You also want to know about personal information. So do you have just family photos? Do you have your banking information? Do you have perhaps documented logins to other sites? Do you have special messaging systems that allow you to communicate with people that someone could exploit? What stuff is actually on your devices that you personally care about? Because it's beyond just what is going on at work. Are you encrypting data at rest? So encryption is the idea that you take data and you run it through some kind of hash so that that data is now unreadable to someone who doesn't hold the key, which is basically the Rosetta Stone of that data. It lets you understand what that data says. If you're traveling with sensitive data on a device, it really behooves you to encrypt the data on the drive so that, let's say, for the sake of argument, that the device is stolen and someone wants to get in. Well, they can't log in to it conventionally. They try to remove the hard drive to pull the data directly from the hard drive. If the data is encrypted at rest, that data is now unreadable since they don't have the key. So encryption at rest can be very powerful and can be implemented usually as part of either mobile device management or other software tools. Do you even have to carry data at all? So one of the things to sort of just keep in mind about all this is that we sort of live in a world now where if you're using third-party, cloud-based solutions, let's say you're using a OneDrive from Microsoft or a Google Drive, or you're logging in remotely to a server somewhere, or a software as a service solution, maybe like a QuickBooks Online, really the data you have on your device should be pretty minimal. You're really going to that data on the website. So keep in mind that a lot of people feel more comfortable, maybe wrongly, by downloading all this data, putting it on their machine, and then holding it with them like this little library. But really, it's harder to protect data that you hold on a personal device than it is for Google or Microsoft or Amazon Web Services or whoever to store that data in a SOC 2 certified environment in the cloud. So just keep that in mind. How easy is it to get to the data on your devices, and are you using MFA? So is it just that when you open up your iPhone, all you have to do is just press the button and all of a sudden you have access to it? Is it that you have to go in and do different patterns? You have to use multi-factor authentication to have an extra login before you access certain kinds of data. You know, if somebody picked up this device, maybe you dropped it, it was stolen, whatever. What would it be like? And are you okay traveling with data that might be might not be good in some countries? So, you know, we're in the United States here, and there's very few pieces of data that you might hold that would put you in legal jeopardy. You know, I'm thinking about things like, I don't want to talk about it, but like there's certainly scandalous information you're not allowed to have here. But most things, like for example, religious information or even pornography or gambling or other things that are considered vices, that's okay to have on your phone here in the United States. But if you went to certain countries, that could be against the law. And what if, you know, you lost this device and all of a sudden it has what is considered contraband in some foreign country? Well, you're not just putting your cyber risk at risk, you're putting your personal life at risk. The US government, the State Department talks about this and puts out travel advisories about this all the time. Settings and configuration when traveling. So do not auto connect to any Wi-Fi ever. So, I mean, this really shouldn't happen regardless, is that your phone shouldn't just look for a wireless access point and connect to it and begin working. That's very risky. Once you're connected to a network, you don't know who's on the other end. Public Wi-Fi itself can be very dangerous. Now, I'd be naive to say don't connect to public Wi-Fi at any time, because the reality is people need to work. They need to connect to the internet and get access to things. But you just need to be aware of what's going on around you. Are you doing this in a large public area? Are you doing this in an area where the network might not be well maintained, where someone might have access to install some sort of nefarious device or what have you? And probably keep in mind that if you're not in an area that you have trust in the local network, maybe you don't do some of the most sensitive data you could do because the risk is a little high. If you don't need Bluetooth, it's a good idea to go on your phone or tablet or laptop and just disable Bluetooth. It's usually just a single button. But Bluetooth is also a communication standard, and you could theoretically connect via Bluetooth to a device and start exfiltrating data from it or create some kind of hack. So it's really a good idea that if you're not using a Bluetooth headset at the time or something like that, to just disable Bluetooth, period. You don't want to even give a third party the ability to connect to your phone. At minimum, your devices need strong password protection, and it's even better if they have multi-factor authentication. The idea that you could, it used to be that you could just, some phones would just let you press the button and they're on. I mean, that really is unacceptable even for the basic personal user. It's even better when you are using an application that's particularly sensitive and it requires you to get that extra text message or open that app and verify your identity before you get in. The reality is these devices are very easy to lose, and so these authentication standards might be the thing between you and a data breach. I mentioned before, hard drives should be encrypted. If theft of the device would be considered a data breach, so I got into that a little bit earlier. Anything like a lobby computer that you might find in a hotel should just not be used for work. You don't know who was on before you. You don't know if someone installed a keylogger on it, or if someone's monitoring the traffic on that computer or whatever. It's one thing if you want to go on it and check the scores last night, or you want to figure out, you want to read the news or something like that. But I'd be very wary before touching a public computer that you just don't know who's touched it. If possible, you should enable remote wiping on your device if it's lost or stolen. This is usually a very easy thing to do. Basically, the device is lost somewhere, you contact Apple or your MDM provider or Google or whoever, and you say, please wipe the device, and all the data is gone. And so, you might not be able to get that device back. It might be lost forever, but at least you won't have to worry necessarily about someone taking advantage of you by having access to that device. It's probably a good idea to avoid using saved logins to apps and websites on devices you travel with. So it really shouldn't be too easy if someone just gets into your device to then just connect to 50 different applications and data shares and things like that when you're traveling. It needs to have extra steps. Hackers are looking for the low-hanging fruit. So if you're making it very difficult for them to get to certain things, they're going to stop at a certain point and look for something easier. when you basically set up everything for you to have these problems happen, they'll happen. You can often disable things like location tracking, which can be used as part of a phishing and social engineering scheme. So, your phone is a very powerful GPS tool. I use it all the time, Google Maps, etc. But people could potentially see where devices are based on GPS coordinates and then use that to go after you. They could say, hey, Ben, we know you're in New York right now, if I was, and, your car has been alerted for some issue. Use it as some kind of information to develop trust and then attack you. So generally, if your apps or device doesn't need location tracking, you should disable it, just like disabling Bluetooth. There are non-technical threats to deal with as well. So, you shouldn't leave your sensitive devices unattended during your travels. You should know where they are. You should have access to them. You don't want something to be logged into. Someone goes in, they look at something, and then they commit a crime with it afterwards. I never recommend putting a device in a checked bag. So for me, if I'm traveling, I have a carry-on, usually a backpack, and I'll put my laptop in there, my phone, my tablet, all of it in there. The thing about checked bags is people can get into checked bags. Checked bags get lost and stolen all the time. And once it's out of your control, you really have no idea who touched it. Even, I'm not saying that TSA would do anything, but like, you don't even know if a bad actor in TSA could be searching through luggage and do something bad. I mean, all of these possibilities exist when you leave these things unattended. You can consider things like privacy safes in hotel rooms. It's a matter of what your personal risk is with the loss of the device, but there are usually mechanisms to keep your device physically secured when traveling. There's always the threat of eavesdropping in airports, restaurants, and hotels. So just keep in mind, again, this is about knowing what you're doing and where you're doing it. So if you're working, say, on sensitive information, social security numbers, credit card numbers, so on and so forth, probably not best to do that in the coffee shop. Probably not a good idea to do it in the hotel conference room around your attendees, your fellow attendees at that conference. It's just a little too risky. And you don't know who people are. I mean, you only need a little bit of information to create a follow-up attack. And I keep mentioning phishing and social engineering because these are non-technical threats. While they may execute technical threats like malware at the end of them, they are really attacking you, the end user. And so we need to be extra sensitive to attacks on us. There's also the idea of public Wi-Fi computers and other tech in the wild. So you're going to encounter this, and you just need to know what it means before you engage. I mentioned before, public Wi-Fi is completely unknown to you as it pertains to configuration, maintenance, etc. It's like jumping into a quarry. Maybe here in Maryland, there's Oregon Ridge Park. You can jump in this big quarry, but when you jump in, you don't necessarily know how deep it is, where the rocks are, if someone put a fish in that, or if their kid made a mess in it, or whatever. It's just unknown. And so you don't go out super far in the quarry. You're careful because you're avoiding the unknown. We have to take the same kind of approach to public Wi-Fi. I mentioned shared PCs. They're similar concerns, except you can install keyloggers and other malware. Some access points are not necessarily what you think they are. So even though the access point may say something like, DP Solutions guest access, just as an example. What if somebody just decided they saw DPS guest access as a potential wireless access point and decided to mimic it and put the same SSID on it, and instead of it going through a DPS managed network, it was going through some hacker's network that you think is DP Solutions. You really need to be careful before clicking and connecting, because once you're connected, you're sort of already swimming with the sharks. Public networks, the less you know about the network, the less you should do on it. So it's when you're in your home or in your office or something like that, or maybe even at a client's location, somewhere where things are protected and maintained, you have a lot of control and you have a reasonable level of confidence of the security of the network. But the more public you go, the less confidence you have. Some people might ask with VPNs, you know, everything I hear about these VPNs are super secure and everyone should have them. And yeah, VPNs are a very strong tool. They create encrypted traffic between you and a destination, but they're not a catch-all. VPNs are only going to focus on certain types of traffic and certain kinds of privacy. They're not going to do anything about security on your device. They're not going to they're going to be less effective when you're connecting to a rogue access point or if you've been socially engineered. I mean, those sorts of things VPNs can't help you with at all. So I sometimes get a little frustrated with the VPN companies because I feel like they overmarket their stuff. They sort of promise things that are a little, I mean, they're good, but they're a little bit more than what they actually provide. All right, next slide. Come on, there we go. Social media, think before you share. So social media is kind of a threat because, you know, there's really no getting away from people anymore. Social media connects you even when you're not around. You should probably consider not posting at all about your trip before or during. So do people really need to know you're working remotely or not at your home or something like that? I think, you know, if someone wants to post a thing and say, oh, look at me, I'm here in Greece and I'm going to be in Greece for 2 weeks and I can't wait to return back to my home in Baltimore and do this other thing on Saturday when I get back. And it's like you're basically telling people exactly what you're doing. And so maybe somebody's going to use that and say, well, Ben is in Greece, let's try and scam Ben. Ben is going to be back on this day, so let's hack him on that day or say that something happened while he was away. Do all that stuff when you get back. You know, when you get back to town, post on social media and say, hey, look at all my Greece pictures and look at all of this, and this was a fun experience, and now I'm back. Well, at least then, if there's sensitive information about you, the exploit can't necessarily be taken advantage of in quite the same way. You know, if you do post, be careful not to share things that are too personal or identifying. So, you know, maybe don't have your passport in the picture. Maybe don't have the location of your hotel in the picture, or details about the work you're doing or something like that. You know, be vague, vague enough that it's, you know, fun but not dangerous. I mentioned before, enable MFA, monitor your social media. Someone might want to use your identity in service of a cybercrime. You know, if getting back to the Ben in Greece example, what if I went to Greece and people knew it, and then someone decided, well, this is a great time, Ben's not around, we're going to start trying to mimic him. We're going to spoof him and start sending emails because Ben's not around, he's not, people are just going to assume it's him. If you monitor some of the things that are going on with your social media, you might be able to avoid it. I'm not saying these things necessarily will happen, but the opportunity exists. Lastly, many social media networks know where you're from and where you're posting, regardless of enablement on the device. So these permissions can be a little tricky because you might post, just woke up and had a wonderful breakfast on my trip, and then it posts on Facebook, posted from Sicily or whatever. You know, you didn't tell Facebook you were in Sicily. It used your location data and posted it for you. So just keep that in mind. You know, again, I don't want to put a wet blanket on everything that we do with technology. It's just that with every action we take, there's kind of a risk that pops up as a result. So just wrapping up, when you travel, your risks become more difficult to manage. So you need to be extra mindful of your behaviors when engaging with technology. I mean, this is a pretty simple thing. You know, you should already be doing a lot of the stuff for good cyber hygiene to begin with. You already should be using multi-factor authentication on sensitive accounts that have sensitive data behind them. You should already be using endpoint protection. You should already be patching your devices. You should be making sure that you limit the exposure of data and manage your corporate networks and things like that. So when you're traveling, a lot of the threats are really going to be about you managing how you engage with things, as opposed to doing something special. The boundaries have really fallen, and we have to be mindful of that. So anyway, we'll take some questions now, and while Jill's getting the questions together from the audience, I will just do a couple little things. We've got upcoming, I'll be moderating at the Howard Chamber Cyber Conference on July 13th at Howard Community College. We have some great guests. I'll be moderating. We're going to talk about remote/hybrid work and the security risks associated with it and how these industry leaders dealt with it. It's going to be really exciting. And there's also the Think Innovate conference in October in Owings Mills, which more details will come with that as they come, I guess. Anyway, that's it. Contact information is to the side. And with all that said, Jill, do we have any questions?
Yes, thanks, Ben. Yes, we do have a couple questions that came in. The first one is there something that I should do right before I leave for my trip?
I think right before you leave your trip is sort of when it's just like when you're checking over your bags and stuff like that to make sure you didn't forget your toothbrush or something. It's sort of making sure that your devices have all patches and updates, that the anti-malware, antivirus, endpoint detection software, whatever it is working well and is doing scans and things like that. That you have a good password policy, that you're doing all the right things in that regard. You also want to make sure that if there's any kind of physical things you can do to secure your devices, that you pack that stuff away, etc. Mostly the preparation is doing the right things up front that you should be doing anyway.
Okay, great. All right, our next question is, what should I do if I lose my device while traveling?
That's a tricky one. So if you lose your device while traveling, the first thing is to communicate. So, let's say for the sake of argument that it's a work device, you're going to want to talk to the people who are the stakeholders in this. So let's say you have an IT department or a MSP like DP Solutions. You'll want to notify them that the device was lost. You want to give any information that you know about it. So I think I lost it this time. I'm not sure what or was not enabled. I think there's sensitive information on there. I don't think there's sensitive information on there, so on and so forth. And then let the experts try to handle any sort of technical issues. It's really important that you're transparent and honest about everything, because this is going to impact, if there is a data breach, what the impact of that breach could be. In addition, it's probably a good idea to go on your social networks. If you're on Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever, and you post on there, probably a good idea to change all those logins and passwords. It's maybe a good idea to tell people, hey, my device is lost. If you get any strange messages from me, you should be aware that it's probably not me. It's probably somebody who took advantage. So just keep that in mind, that kind of thing. Communication is really critical. And like most things in technology, the technology itself will work pretty well if you manage and communicate it right.
Great. Okay, I see we do have one more question that came in. Will a laptop lock protect my device, or is it better to use the hotel room safe?
I mean, a lock, those locks are pretty solid. I mean, you can pull on them and the device won't get ripped out, like one of those Kensington locks or something like that. Hard to replace the security of a safe. Honestly, I think if you're doing either of those things, if the device isn't easy to take away, it's hard to imagine that if you locked your device to something that was anchored, that someone's going to break in, cut through the lock, break that down, steal the device, etc. If you're at the point where that kind of risk, that kind of scenario that I painted is even if as implausible as it would be, is still a risk you can't take, then maybe you shouldn't even have the device with you on your trip. It's that kind of thing. So the bottom line is you don't need to overthink physically securing your devices. You just need to know that while you are not attending the device, you're out to dinner or you're visiting the town or whatever, that you are confident that someone else doesn't have access to it. You don't have to measure one against the other.
Okay, that appears to be all of our questions. I think we can go ahead and wrap up.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Jill, and thanks everybody for watching today. I hope you found the information interesting, and we look forward to seeing you next time.